What's new from Apple? There's the new iPhone 16 Pro, built for Apple Intelligence. And it comes with the all-new camera control, giving you an easier way to quickly access your camera tools. The new Apple Watch Series 10 has our biggest display and our thinnest design ever. And this? It's the sound of active noise cancellation, now available on one of 2 new AirPods 4 models. So quiet. Check out all of the new products and new features at apple.com. You can even buy yourself something new. See apple.com for product availability updates. Apple Intelligence coming this fall.
Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking about the bonanza of speeding tickets, parking violations, and license suspensions that 2 of the leading mayoral candidates have on their records. The campaign contribution swapping that it appears most of our city candidates are engaged in, and the spike in fare evasion on TriMet's MAX trains. Joining me on this week's Friday News Roundup are Jake Weigler, a Portland political strategist and partner at the consulting firm Praxis, and our very own producer, Julia Fiaioni. It's Friday the 13th of September. I'm John Notarianni, in for Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Hello and welcome to the Friday News Roundup here on CityCast Portland. Jake, Julia, thanks for being here.
Hey, good morning.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Jake, it's your first time on the show. You're the newbie. How does it feel?
I'm the virgin. You got to be kind and gentle.
We'll be very gentle, we promise. For people who are new to the show, every Friday we like to sit down and talk about some of the biggest headlines of the week. But before we get into the episode, I like to have an opening question to kind of get everybody settled in, let you know a little bit more about who's in the room. And today, the opening question is about U.S. Representative Earl Blumenauer. We know that he had retired from his post representing the Oregon 3rd Congressional District. He'd been in that job since 1996, but it was just announced this week that he's going to be joining the faculty at Portland State University. He's going to be a senior fellow, special advisor to the university's president, which brings me to my question. When you guys are done with the line of work that you're in right now, when you're going into that like semi-retired space, what is your ideal like half-retired cushy job for yourself? I can go first. You guys ever go to the bar Expatriate in Northeast Portland?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, really nice little cocktail bar. And the owner, Kyle Webster, a couple nights of the week, he'll just show up and DJ. They have like their own vinyl record collection. And he'll just like hang out in the bar, spin records, and just, set the vibe for the room. And I think that's what I want to do when I'm like 65 years old. Would have to be somewhere that closes early because I'm not going to want to stay out till like 2 a.m. at that point in my life.
Honestly, John, I could see you in that environment.
I could have a dapper little like old man outfit, Like maybe like a silly hat, because you can get away with that when you're old.
Oh, yeah. I feel like this is a really easy one for me because I think about this all the time.
Julia, you've got a long way to go.
I know, John. I think about that too. And every single time I go hiking and I'm out there on the trails, I'm always thinking about the people who do trail maintenance. And they basically just get to go for hikes for a living. And that sounds so nice just to be outside all the time. To just jump from state park to state park, going for hikes and maintaining trails just sounds so nice.
Plus you get to have a chainsaw.
Yes.
It should be pretty awesome.
Right? Machete, anything. Sign me up.
What about you, Jake?
I have to admit, I don't have a great plan. My wife and I talk about the classic, open a restaurant. And then we think through what that would actually entail and how unsoul fulfilling it would be. Plus, John, same as you, like 9 o'clock, we're in bed. So
yeah,
that doesn't seem to line up. And then personally, I'm always like, oh, a teacher, that would be great, give back. But again, I don't think a very like relaxing part-time, as you say, kind of thing. It would be pretty intense. So yeah, I think I need a better option.
Yeah. I think the thing with the restaurant is to like find the restaurant that somebody else opened and have like a really low responsibility job there. That's what I was going for.
Exactly. Well, we always talk about like moving to some small part of Oregon and opening like a super high class restaurant where you're like, we'll do 10 servings tonight and that's it. That restaurant.
All right. Yeah, I can see that.
I see it. Yeah.
Stay tuned. Opening 2040, Jake's new restaurant. All right. Well, Jake, you're the new guy. You're going first. And I think you're looking at the big story of the week.
Yeah, it's certainly been the talk of the political town. And so if you weren't playing along at home, on Monday, the Oregonian released what, at least for Oregon, passes as a pretty hot scandal or controversy, which is they reported that Portland City Councilor and mayoral candidate Carmen Rubio had over 150 traffic and parking violations. And then frequently those went unpaid for an extended period of time. Over 100 of them ended up going to collections. Her car was impounded twice in 2012, 2015. A judge suspended her license 6 times because if you don't pay those things, eventually it escalates to getting your license suspended and getting a 5-month suspension, 2016. And it's definitely a lot of it happened in the past, but there have been a couple examples since she became a city councilor. She's ticketed in 2022 for parking in a no parking zone at Providence Park during a Timbers game kickoff. And then in July, she parked in a truck loading zone near City Hall.
I'm sorry. I just a parking zone at Providence Park during a game. You know you can't get away with that. You know you can't get away with that. That's not not paying a meter downtown. That is, come on.
Mm-hmm.
In respect to the carless population, but for those of us who do drive to that game, you've all done that game where you start near the park and just keep working outwards until you finally find a spot in the industrial area, and you're like, am I even going to this game? So that also was compounded later in the week. She lost the endorsement of LIUNA, which is the laborers union, 737. They represent workers at the city. And she said that, in her younger days, she always put her family and financial and career obligations first, her personal obligations last, and that she's learned the consequences of doing that so that she won't de-emphasize her personal life. And so that was the talk on Monday. And then by Monday night, the Willamette Week suddenly had all the dirt on another mayoral candidate within hours of this story. So that evening, I couldn't imagine how that happened. So that evening, the Willamette Week published a story about Rene Gonzalez, also city councilor, running for mayor, and his record. And they played up that he has really positioned himself as a law enforcement candidate, has gotten endorsements from law enforcement. DA's talked about kind of rule of law and public safety a lot in his campaign. But he himself had 7 speeding tickets and 4 times where he'd failed to display his car registration. He's also cited for fare evasion on Max in 2014. His license was suspended twice in 1998 and 2003. And he says that he's matured, that he sped when he was a younger man, but that he's grown out of that. And he hasn't had any vehicle violations since 2013. So a lot of this is more in the rearview mirror for him. So those were the 2 frontrunner candidates for mayor, and suddenly they are on their heels. And so it's been an interesting week.
Oh my gosh. So we all work on the Hey Portland newsletter as well, in addition to doing this podcast. And on Monday, we were working on pulling it together. And then the Carmen Rubio story came out, and we were like, oh my gosh, okay, we have to pivot and cover this. And then we got that done, and we're proud of ourselves, and we're putting it to bed. Then around 5 o'clock, the Gonzalez story came out, and we were like, stop the presses again. Now we got to get this into it. We were joking, if something comes out about Mingus Maps at 8 o'clock tonight, we are taking a sick day tomorrow. This is too insane. What caught your attention in all of this, Julia?
It's funny. I've just been loving following the Reddit thread on this. And I think it's because of the contrast of opinion on this one. And even just talking with friends, I've seen people have an immediate reaction of, that's kind of relatable. I get it. I'm not paying for that shit either. And how entitled are these people in thinking that they could get away with dozens of instances of traffic violations and never have it come out and still continue to pursue positions that are public facing? So I feel like I kind of sit somewhere in the middle where I get it. A lot of this happened quite some time ago, but you have to have some sort of personal accountability, a baseline. And that, if you're starting there, it does make me wonder, just how fit you are for this position, especially coming in, having to lead a whole team of new people under a new government structure. It's a lot of responsibility. And if this is something that you let slip by, I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, and it does, to my mind, like we might be extrapolating a little bit here, but when we think of both of these candidates and what they really are priding themselves on, what their messaging is, I think that Carmen Rubio is really positioning herself as someone who has an extraordinary amount of like administrative leadership, who's run organizations, who's really good at policies and like working through these things. And in some ways, having 100+ tickets in your background kind of undercuts that. And like you said, Jake, Rene Gonzalez really going hard on like the law and order candidate, then to turn around, especially seeing him evading fare on the max on TriMet as someone who had put so much of his campaign into like the stabilization and public safety on the MAX train. Like, we'll see if this actually affects voters. We'll see if this moves the poll numbers. But it feels like the biggest shakeup that this mayoral race has had yet.
Yeah, Jake, I'm wondering if you think, from your perspective, this will create enough space for another candidate to be now equally as viable as they were up until this point, where they were seen as like the two front runners and so on and so forth. Do you think this will shake things up enough?
It could. And I'll say, for political operatives like myself, when you're charting out a campaign like this, there's getting these stories placed, and then there's actually getting them in front of people's eyeballs. And so you have to spend money on advertising usually to produce all those shocking mailers and TV ads. So I think that's remains to be seen how much impact this will have. And I think that's honestly been the challenge in the mayoral race. We have a lot of the establishment players on the left and the right who have really said, like, we need to pick someone early to get behind. Mm-hmm. And they have kind of sorted themselves into Renee and Carmen camps. And so I think that center of gravity is really challenging for any of the other candidates in the mayoral race. I'm sure Mingus is pretty frustrated by that dynamic, considering he's also a city councilor. But whether that's going to be enough to break through and kind of get out of this two-person race that seems to be the preference for a lot of the establishment, I think remains to be seen. And just the reality also of public financing is it's hard for these mayoral candidates to compete with independent expenditures. There's just going to be so much more money outside of the campaigns themselves. It kind of goes back to that question of, like, at the end, what are voters going to be hearing about? That's largely going to be determined by outside groups.
Well, speaking of Mingus Maps, he jumped on this almost immediately. Yeah, so he was on Twitter. This is what he wrote. Yesterday, 2 of my opponents were exposed for egregious traffic violations. Here's the truth. I don't have a single traffic citation. Why? Because I play by the same rules as every other Portlander. But let's be real. This isn't just about traffic tickets. It's about privilege. My opponents' actions show that they feel they are above the law, a luxury most Portlanders, especially those of us from marginalized communities, don't have. As a Black man, I don't get to flout the rules. I live by them, and I'll make sure our leaders do. It goes on from there. But to me, that's the most concise and focused political messaging I've heard from Mingus Maps over the course of this entire campaign. You know?
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear that. And I also really do think he has a point. And that's a lot of where voters are feeling frustrated, because they are thinking from that perspective where they can't even imagine creating that type of a scenario for themselves and trying to pull themselves out of it. It's just not an option.
Well, and that does seem to be kind of the Mingus playbook. Is like, I'm here, I'm not too weird or, out there. Like, I'll just be here in the background waiting. And I mean, you think about when he first got on council, you had Chloe Eudaly, who had provoked really strong opinions, positive and negative. And Sam Adams is one of the ones running against the same dynamic. And he's just kind of like, no, I'm normal. I'm a regular guy like you. And I think there is a pathway that maybe ends up getting to victory. I think it's a tough one for him, but it's certainly not out of the question.
Yeah. I guess I'm curious, like, what is the next step here? Like, how soon do we have to wait till we have some sort of sense of whether this is moving the needle or not?
Yeah. I mean, it's sad that the collapse of our media establishment has also meant a lot less polling. Back in the day, I remember I'd pitch a poll that I'd done to the Oregonian, and they'd laugh and be like, you paid for that poll. We're not going to publish it. And you noticed that a few months ago, they published a poll that clearly come from the Gonzalez camp. So
Yeah.
My expectation is at least somebody's polling on this. Whether we're going to see data soon, I don't know. But as I said, like those outside groups are pretty focused on this race. They have amassed some resources. So I'm sure that they're looking at things very closely right now.
Yeah. Well, Jake, thanks for bringing us the story.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, more news of the week. You've probably all seen the news by now about rising energy costs, right? It might be time to think about an alternative. So here's a few options. One, you could design your own plutonium-fueled nuclear reactor, Back to the Future style, or you could just take advantage of the biggest fuel source in the solar system. Yeah, I'm talking about the sun. Solar panels can power your home with clean, renewable energy while also shrinking your bills and reducing your impact on the environment. And with smart battery storage, solar does even more. Like during power outages, you're going to have backup power for stuff like keeping your lights on and your refrigerator running. But the best news is that solar energy and battery storage qualify for cash incentives from Energy Trust of Oregon and a 30% federal tax credit. That means you could save thousands of dollars. Now, if you're not familiar, Energy Trust is an independent nonprofit organization that helps people and organizations save energy and adopt clean energy solutions. And the best way to get started with solar plus storage is to just request a free, no-obligation bid from an Energy Trust Solar Trade Ally at energytrust.org/citycast. Hey, it's John from CityCast Portland. Let's face it, sometimes bad stuff happens. A serious injury, a catastrophic accident, even a wrongful death. It can really turn your world upside down. And when it does, you deserve unwavering support from a dedicated team. Yeah, you need a lawyer. D'Amour Law Group has over 30 years of experience protecting the rights of Oregonians. Their team of skilled attorneys, led by the renowned trial lawyer Tom D'Amour, will work tirelessly to make sure your voice is heard and your rights are protected. Here's what one of his clients said. Tom fights for his clients from the first day they meet him through the last day of trial. So if you need help holding those responsible for your injuries accountable, contact D'Amour Law Group at 503-222-6333 or visit d'amourlaw.com to schedule a free consultation. They're committed to fighting for the justice and compensation you deserve right here in Portland. All right, Julia, we're still talking about the big races in the city. What story did you bring this week?
Yeah, so my segment comes from Sophie Peel at Willamette Week and Carlos Fuentes at The Oregonian. They're talking about how the Oregon Secretary of State opened an investigation looking into Portland City Council and mayoral candidates who traded campaign contributions. But before I talk about the investigation specifically, I want to back up to last week when this all went down. Basically, it was discovered that 648 mutual transactions occurred between candidates. And of those transactions, it was found that 10 city council candidates and one mayoral candidate actually agreed in writing to swap campaign contributions. And this is all according to Willamette Week. So what this means is they were essentially writing to each other in this massive email thread saying something along the lines of, hey, if you donate $5 to me, I'll donate $5 to you. And this is among candidates. And this is important because candidates had until the end of August to reach enough individual donations to qualify for matching taxpayer funds from the city's small donor elections program to help with their campaign, which is something that's been around since 2016 to kind of even out the playing field. But council candidates had to reach 250 individual donations to qualify for at least $40,000 in funds. And mayoral candidates had to reach 750 individual donations to unlock up to $100,000 in funds. And I lay this all out because in some cases, those reciprocal donations were kind of crucial. For example, Carlos Fuentes reported mayoral candidate Leave Ossis, who agreed to reciprocal donations in writing, only had roughly 755 certified Portland donors by the time the matching funds deadline came around.
This one's confusing for me, and I feel like there's a couple layers to it. I mean, the one thing that jumps out at me from the Oregonian reporting is setting aside the quid pro quo question. 69 out of 118 candidates had at least some sort of reciprocal donation on their rolls, which, like, that's the majority of people who are running for office right now. So, like, in total, this isn't a crazy thing to be doing. I will also point out there's, like, a little bit of discrepancy in some of the numbers, but, like, despite that, the overall trend is the same. Some portion of this is really just common in how politics happens, but it is that sliver of people that are caught on the record explicitly doing this that I think creates a lot of concern.
Yeah. And I'll talk a little bit more about that proof and this investigation that's going on. So for a moment, the Oregon Secretary of State, LaVon Griffin-Vallée, was actually waiting for a complaint to be made to launch the investigation, a formal complaint from anybody. But that never actually happened, and they just took it upon themselves to move forward with it because it's their job to oversee election laws.
Because every candidate's doing it, so no one's filing a complaint.
Exactly. Found that very interesting. And although nothing was released as of September 12th morning while we're taping, experts have been weighing in and saying that the reciprocal donations are likely a violation of Oregon law, which specifically notes that it prohibits political candidates from soliciting donations using, quote, undue influence, which the example of, hey, $5 for you, $5 for me would fall under that category, according to experts. And something interesting and really scary that Sophie Peel pointed out in her reporting is that violating this undue influence law is a Class C felony, punishable by up to 5 years in prison or a fine of up to $125,000. So this is like serious stuff. It's not like, there's no joke in this. Like, people are kind of scrambling to cover their backs now.
Yeah. Jake, you have the longest history of following politics in Portland. How does this strike you? Is this just business as usual and the journalists are making hay out of it? Is this crazy?
Yeah, I mean, I admit I have a little contrary views here. And I should start by saying, because I do work in city council races, I do not work in mayoral races this cycle, but I have a number of clients who have been wrapped up in this, as has almost every candidate. I was certainly not party to these conversations, but I do want to be transparent.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it doesn't look great, right? And it also, I think, speaks to their inexperience. You know, the irony to me is most of these receipts that we're focused on, or the quid pro quos, are this group listserv that a bunch of the candidates created so they could all talk to each other, you know, and usually in campaigns, it's like they're the enemy. If they win, we lose. We have this crazy dynamic in these council races where they're all having fun with each other and talking to each other and being like, hey, I'll go to this event and you do this.
Oh my gosh.
Hey, check this out. And so it's, although this is not great and it certainly may have some significant consequences, I don't think it came from a manipulating the system kind of dynamic. It was like, oh, we're on this adventure together. If you help me, I'll help you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't think that it is nefarious, but we have this small donor program that there's a threshold, then you get a whole lot of money. So, like, we know, like you said, Julia, there's a lot of candidates that are relying on this funding from this city program to be able to make a campaign. And again, I'm sure that there were plenty of people that just got caught up in the spirit of sharing with their fellow candidates. But I think there are at least a couple instances where people are manipulating this system to get themselves across the threshold to get this money, which, like, that is manipulative to my mind. That isn't appropriate.
Well, the point of that threshold is so that people who have gathered enough public interest are receiving support to further their campaign. It's not based off of the interest in candidates amongst each other. That's not the point, right? It's about who will be voting for them. And I think it just completely skirts around the purpose of that barrier to begin with, which I think is kind of funny.
It's to demonstrate public support for
exactly,
these people.
Exactly. Yeah. And I agree, Jake. I don't think any of this was done out of malice. And I'm sure it would have been so easy to get caught up in this and want to be helpful. And you can even see in some of the messages that were sent back and forth, it was all very positive of like, of course I'll send you $5. Like, that's an easy one. Like, don't even worry about it. Like, this feels great. I will say, as of Wednesday, 5 out of the 11 candidates reported by Willamette Week who agreed to reciprocate those donations in writing had actually unlocked their matching funds. And Of those 5, at least one candidate, Chad Likens from District 4, which is North and Southwest, and Selwood, he had said that he was refunding those contributions from other candidates as a precaution because he's taking it very seriously. And several other candidates had also contacted the Oregon Secretary of State's office pretty early on asking for guidance. They hadn't received anything back because investigation hadn't been launched yet. So there's been a little bit of silence on that front, but I'm sure in the coming weeks we'll probably be starting to hear a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I'll be interested how that turns out. The threshold of when you get to undue influence has been kind of an open question. I remember in a previous cycle, not a campaign I was actually working against, passed out vote yes messages with $2 coupons attached.
Coupons for what?
For a product. I won't name the guilty party, but it's a well-known household product. And they went to SOS, and SOS said, it's only $2. Like, that's not really undue influence. And so 2 versus 5, I mean, I'll be interested to see what is the ultimate conclusions of the investigation here. And the other piece is, there's a model in the law that talks about this idea of small donor groups and organizations building out kind of a big grassroots base of donors that then they could direct towards campaigns. And I haven't seen organizations doing that at all. Like, that was the assumption, was you change the campaign finance laws, they will go back to the books and like really focus on building out like a small donor base. And that may change in 2027, because now it's going to be part of state law. But I think there was this assumption that it would kind of shift organizational giving to really focus on kind of bundling a bunch of little contributions, and it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. I also think it's just interesting as a sort of thermometer of political savviness, right? Because again, like, there's 2 things at play here. There's like the majority of candidates who have some sort of reciprocal donations on their books, and then a much smaller subset that are caught up in this like email thread where they are explicitly sort of trading with each other.
Yeah.
But, like some of the candidates that are among the who I would say most experienced are also very high in this list, right? Like, the person with the most is Loretta Smith, who we know is somebody who's been around politics for a long time, who really knows what they're doing. And what I see here is just a divide between the candidates that like kind of know the proper way to manipulate politics and to get around the rules and to bend the rules to be what they need them to be, and those that don't. And I think that you can definitely see who's the slick political operator and who's the sort of enthusiastic, maybe not as quite as experienced politicians in this whole kerfuffle.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I frequently feel like I'm like Neo in the Matrix. Or not Neo, sorry.
Go on.
Morpheus.
You can stop time.
When he's training Neo in the room, he's like, some rules can be broken. Others can be, it's like, you learn the rules and then you learn how to get around the rules. And
oh my gosh. Do you know what rules can be broken? We're not asking you to tell right now, but we might in the future.
I know ways around the rules.
Oh my gosh.
I know the back doors.
All right, you guys, let's take another quick break and then come back to more news of the week.
Approximate wait time is 75 minutes for a representative.
Flight 472 delayed. Please see the representative at the counter for details.
Things will go wrong for your customers, but your business can make it right with Watson X Assistant. AI that can help resolve problems by understanding your customer requests with 90% accuracy. Let's create customer service in service of customers with Watson X Assistant. Learn more at ibm.com/assistant. IBM. Let's create.
Now, 2 pigeons bemoaning the fact you can stream DirecTV satellite-free.
These humans can stream all the top-rated national news channels on DirecTV, and now with no satellite dish.
This just in. Weather, sports, election coverage. DirecTV has it all, but something is missing. The satellite dish.
What are you doing?
I'm reporting the news. Back to you, Bob.
Here's some news. You're a buffoon.
Stream the top-rated national news channels. No satellite dish. Visit DirecTV.com. Internet required. Top-rated news based on 2023 Nielsen ratings.
All right. The story that I'm looking at today largely is coming from reporting by Hillary Baroud at the Oregonian. So, Fare Evasion on TriMet Max trains. They did these annual surveys for many years, but then sort of paused during the pandemic to figure out who was paying versus who was just sort of riding for free. Well, earlier this year, they did the first of these surveys since 2020. And as of March, in a snapshot, it looked like fare evasion had gone through the roof compared to what it was before. More than a quarter of riders on the MAX trains weren't able to produce a valid ticket. This was a 3-week study. In March, 27% of the people that had been riding lacked to be able to show a ticket. And that number could be higher, actually, because the way that they did it, they surveyed a number of people, but around 400 people just hopped off the trains before the fare surveyor could come and talk to them.
Yeah.
So not saying that all of those people didn't have a ticket, but 27% is the figure. The number could possibly be higher. For context, back in 2014, the rates of fare evasion were at 9%. In 2019, which is the last year that they did the survey, it was around 19%. There have been efforts in place since then to sort of correct this, but it was a really interesting snapshot of how things had changed since the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely evaded fares in my lifetime, not going to lie. It's a relatable thing. If you think you're going to get away with it, you're going to try to do it. I did this mostly when I was in Toronto as a student because busier city, it's easier to hide in the crowds. But
what about you, Jake? Do you know the best way to evade fares on TriMet?
In my experience, it's going to the Blazer game. And then and there's no way they could even check your ticket if they wanted to.
It's savvy. Sorry, Julia.
No, I think about that a lot, though, when I see these statistics come out about just how many people are doing this. And I think it's because, first of all, it's seen as an option in a lot of ways. And with how expensive things have gotten since COVID, it's the one thing that you can just not really worry about, honestly. And I will say the first thing I think about on a more practical level is how there are options for people who are in more strained financial circumstances to apply for programs that would make it so that their fare was almost free. But I don't think those programs have adjusted for what's happened since COVID hit, where most people who are making minimum wage, it's really not enough. It's never been enough, but it's even more so not enough to meet the needs of their day-to-day livelihood. And I know this because I've looked into it before for friends of mine in years where I was working in the service industry to see if I could set it up for them. And every single time it was met with so many barriers and roadblocks because what they do is they look at your total income made in a month before taxes, not after. And in that, it's seen as you're making enough to afford a train ticket or a bus ticket. But in reality, you don't see that money. So you're not actually able to afford it. And then you're put in a position where you'd much rather just kind of dodge the fare if you can. So I get it. I understand for people who are really strained, it's kind of not a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not just Portland where this is happening. Earlier this week, the New York Times pointed out that bus fare evasion in New York has also skyrocketed, since 2018. And to me, I don't know, this might be me extrapolating a little bit too much, but it does feel like this social fabric crime of opportunity type thing where, it's not like some other crimes that are done completely out of desperation every time. It's more of a I think I know I can get away with this. So Joe, who's on his way to sit in the 200 section at the Blazers game, knows that no one's going to check his ticket. So why is he going to spend $280 to ride the train?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And, I'm looking at it a little from the institutional perspective. And I think you're right. There's really low stakes here. No one gets hurt if you don't pay the fare. Systemically, it impacts the system, right? Because they need the revenue. But to me, the interesting part is, and this kind of parallels what's happened with enforcement of vehicles and vehicle registration. I think there were some intentional efforts done 5-7 years ago to talk about kind of over-policing of communities of color and how traffic stops, fare evasion stops, enforcement on MAX lines, tend to disproportionately impact communities of color, and recognizing that was an inequitable outcome. And so you saw both the city kind of reduce enforcement on the vehicle side. TriMet really, you remember they pulled people off of the MAX platforms. Mm-hmm. And so it's we're trying to solve this inequitable racist impact of kind of enforcement. But then what's the way to motivate people to do the right thing? And I don't think in either the vehicle or the public transit thing, we figured out alternatives to enforcement to kind of get everyone to do the right thing. And so I don't have that answer. But to me, that's kind of another example of why we're in this thing today is that, if once people figure out, oh, there's no consequence for me breaking the rules, why do you keep following the rules?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe a proxy for the way that Portland politics in general has swung in the last 4 or 5 years, because there was a loosening of monitoring on TriMet vehicles during the pandemic. Part of that was for safety, but also part of that was to the national and especially the local sentiment of some of these things that you're describing, Jake, about that sort of over-policing. And it's interesting because, this survey was done in March. We're only hearing about it now because of a public records request from the Oregonian, I believe. But in between, in July, TriMet did launch a new push to enforce the rules, including paying fares. They're also really touting how much they have increased security on TriMet vehicles. So, we have, swung away from attempting to create a more humane environment into one that is very oriented towards security and following the rules, which, as we look towards this fall election, feels like there's a lot more sentiment in city politics moving that way than there has been in years past, too.
Yeah. I do wonder, though, how much that will actually help with some pretty violent instances of crime on the max as of the past couple years. I think we won't know for another few years if that's true, or if this will just be another thing that is a burden for people to be around rather than something that actually benefits them.
Yeah. Well, I will say we've asked the leaders of TriMet to come on this show in the past. Doors still open. We'd love to talk to you about all of these issues and about how TriMet's going. So open invitation. If you're out there listening, you know where to find us.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. Well, Jake, Julia, thanks for breaking down the news with me this week. Hope you have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks. It was a fun first time.
Well, that's all for us this week here on CityCast Portland, but thank you so much for tuning in. Our host is Claudia Meza. Our producers this week are Julia Fiaioni and Lizzie Goldsmith. Our Hey Portland newsletter editors are Rachel Monahan and Natalie Rivera, and I'm the executive producer, John Notarianni. Original music by Jenny Conley and Stephen Drisos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound and All the Kimonos. We'll be back on Monday with a whole lot more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.